In 1941, Adolf Hitler made the single biggest mistake in military history, and he did it on purpose. Germany had already conquered France in 46 days, crushed Poland in 27, pushed Britain to the edge of collapse. The war was basically won. Then Hitler looked east and decided he wasn't done. To understand why Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, you have to understand something about the man himself. This wasn't a military decision, it was an obsession. Since 1925, Hitler had been writing about destroying the Soviet Union, about taking Soviet land for German people, about wiping out what he called the Jewish Bolshevik threat to Europe. He called it Lebensraum, living space. The plan was simple in his mind: invade, destroy the Red Army in 6 weeks. Take the land, take the oil, take the grain, enslave or eliminate the people who lived there, then rule Europe from a position nobody could challenge. Simple. He also had reason to believe it would work. Stalin had spent the late 1930s executing his own military officers. Thousands of experienced generals, colonels, and commanders were shot or sent to labor camps during Stalin's Great Purge. The Red Army went into 1941 led largely by people who were too afraid of Stalin to make independent decisions. Hitler looked at this and saw weakness. He wasn't entirely wrong. On the 22nd of June 1941 at exactly 3:15 in the morning, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in the history of human warfare. 3.8 million Axis soldiers, 3,000 tanks, 2,500 aircraft, 7,000 artillery pieces, 600,000 motor vehicles, and 600,000 horses, stretched across a 1,800-mile front from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. 75% of the entire German military participated in a single operation. Think about that for a second. 3/4 of the most powerful army on earth pointed in one direction, at one country, at 3:15 in the morning. The first hours were catastrophic for the Soviet Union. Germany had been secretly massing troops on the Soviet border for months. The British had warned Stalin. Soviet intelligence officers had warned Stalin. Even some German soldiers who deserted and swam across border rivers to warn the Red Army were shot as enemy agents on Stalin's orders. Stalin refused to believe Germany would attack. So when the bombs started falling at 3:15 in the morning, Soviet soldiers had no orders, no preparation, and in many cases no idea what was happening. By the end of the first day, Germany had destroyed approximately 1,800 Soviet aircraft. Most of them never left the ground. Soviet divisions that should have been defending the border were scattered, leaderless, and overwhelmed before they could organize a single coherent defense. Stalin was so shocked by the news that he went silent. For days he barely communicated with his commanders. The man who ran one of the most powerful countries on earth essentially locked himself in his room while Germany tore through his army. The German advance in the opening weeks was extraordinary. Within 1 week they had pushed 200 miles into Soviet territory. By the end of June they had encircled and captured 300,000 Soviet soldiers near Minsk. German tank commander Heinz Guderian's forces were moving so fast that supply lines were struggling to keep up. The blitzkrieg that had demolished France in 6 weeks looked like it was going to do the same thing to the Soviet Union on exactly the schedule Hitler had promised. At Kiev in September, Germany pulled off the largest military encirclement in history. For complete Soviet armies trapped and captured. 665,000 Soviet soldiers taken prisoner in a single operation. Hitler was so confident he started arguing with his own generals about the next target. His generals said Moscow. Hitler said Ukraine first. That argument cost him everything. By mid-July, Germany had advanced over 400 miles and were just 200 miles from Moscow. The momentum was extraordinary. Soviet resistance was fierce, but the Red Army was still reeling. Moscow was within reach. But Hitler overruled his generals and ordered the main thrust to go south toward Ukraine first to secure the oil fields and agricultural resources. It took months, and those months gave the Soviet Union something Germany had not accounted for: time. Time for Stalin to recover his nerve and take personal command. Time for Soviet factories that had been physically dismantled and moved east of the Ural Mountains to start producing tanks and weapons again. Time for fresh divisions from Siberia to begin moving west toward Moscow. And time for something else entirely. Something no German planner had seriously prepared for. Winter? Hitler had told his generals this would be over in 6 weeks. Nobody packed for winter. The German army that invaded in June 1941 in summer uniforms was still wearing those same uniforms in December when temperatures dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers stuffed newspapers into their thin jackets trying to insulate themselves from cold they had never experienced. Lubricating oils in German guns and tank engines were not designed for extreme cold. They froze solid. To load a shell into a tank's main gun, soldiers had to chip frozen grease off the mechanism with a knife first. Aircraft engines had to be kept running continuously through the night because if they were switched off, they couldn't be restarted in the morning. 100,000 German soldiers suffered frostbite during the winter campaign. 15,000 limbs were amputated. Meanwhile, Soviet soldiers had warm quilted uniforms, felt-lined boots and fur hats, and fresh divisions from Siberia who had spent their entire lives in exactly this kind of cold and were completely comfortable fighting in it. Germany had brought a summer army to a winter war. By December 1941, German forces had reached the outskirts of Moscow, close enough to see the spires of the Kremlin with binoculars. Some units actually penetrated the suburbs of the city. And then on the 5th of December 1941, the Soviet counteroffensive began.
Forward for the motherland!
Over 1 million Soviet soldiers, fresh, warm, armed with new equipment from the factories that had been running day and night since the invasion began. They slammed into exhausted German forces who had been fighting continuously for 6 months without rotation or rest. In a typical war, frontline troops are pulled back and replaced with fresh soldiers periodically. In Barbarossa, there were no replacement troops. The men who invaded in June were the same men standing in the snow in December, completely depleted, frostbitten, running on almost nothing. The Soviet counteroffensive pushed them back over 200 miles. Hitler was so enraged he fired his top generals and took personal command of the army himself. Operation Barbarossa was officially over on the 5th of December 1941. 6 months instead of 6 weeks, 830,000 German casualties. And the Eastern Front that Barbarossa had opened would grind on for another 4 years, consuming soldiers on both sides at a rate the world had never seen. 82% of all German military casualties in the entire war happened on the Eastern Front. More people died fighting on the Eastern Front alone than in all other fighting across the entire globe during World War II combined. So why did Hitler lose?
Them here!
But the winter...
No exceptions! Move the tanks now!
His generals gave him the answer before the invasion even started. Don't fight a two-front war. Don't invade Russia in summer and expect to finish before winter. Don't underestimate the Soviet Union's ability to absorb losses and keep fighting. Don't let ideology override military logic. Hitler ignored every single warning. He delayed the invasion by 5 weeks to deal with Yugoslavia and Greece first. Those 5 weeks meant the army reached Moscow in winter instead of autumn. He diverted the main thrust south to Ukraine when every general he had told him to push straight to Moscow while the momentum was there. He refused to prepare winter equipment because he was certain the war would be over before winter arrived, and he fundamentally misunderstood what he was dealing with. The Soviet Union lost more soldiers in the first weeks of Barbarossa than most countries have in their entire military history, and they kept fighting because they had no choice. Stalin's orders were simple: you do not retreat, you do not surrender. And eventually they won. 4 years after Barbarossa began, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Historians still argue about whether Germany ever had a realistic chance of winning the war after the 22nd of June 1941. Most say no. That the moment Hitler committed 75% of his military to a single campaign against the largest country on earth with no winter preparation and no plan for what happens if it takes longer than 6 weeks, he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. And neither did the 3.8 million soldiers who crossed that border at 3:15 in the morning thinking they'd be home by Christmas.